We may have slipped on a little bit, but isn't it good to be together today?
Amen.
It's been an interesting week, a wonderful week that we've had an opportunity, a lot of us, to be together on numerous occasions with Bethlehem Revisited going on. And it's been good to be a part of that, see other people doing that. But also it's very good to be here this morning. Last week we began basically a series looking at Born and looking at Jesus. Last week looking at Born to Live, this morning we're going to be focusing on Born to Die. And then finally next week, Born to Live again. But for right now, we're going to continue in some praise and worship. We're going to have a prayer together, and then Dick has a song he's going to share with us.
Heavenly Father, as we gather here this morning to honor you, to sing praises to your name, to hear your message proclaimed, and we just ask that you be with each one that's here this morning, that we might worship you in the Spirit, that as we go out this coming week, that people could know that we live for Christ who died for us. So be with us through this service, and be with us as we praise your name. For we ask it in Jesus' name.
us chose to be born. As a matter of fact, none of us really have chosen to die. Actually, I mean, if you think about it, probably most of us would choose to live forever. Not necessarily in the way that we're living right now, in the bodies that we're living right now. Most of us would choose to live forever, would we not? And so when we think about Jesus being born on the earth, in this Christmas season, maybe we can be reminded of Jesus as the only person who chose both to be born and to die. As I personally began to reflect on, of course, the things that we looked at last week, when Jesus was born to live, and the importance of his life here. Not just his birth, but the importance of what he lived and why he lived. And not to go back over all of that, but then looking as well at the fact that he was born to die. And that he made a choice to do that. You know, if we had made a choice to be born, it's very unlikely we would be making the choice to die. In 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 15, it says it is a trustworthy statement deserving full acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Paul adding to that, among whom I am foremost of all. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. When we think even of a baby in a manger, and I don't know about the rest of you who had the opportunity to be at Bethlehem Revisited last night, but there was something different last night. As you rounded the corner to go into the manger scene, it was no longer the rubber dolly laying there, but a live baby. And when you think of a live baby that is right there, but then think of it in terms of that baby was born to save me. Intentionally. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. That's why he came. And we can look at his life and we can see all the things that he did, but if he hadn't chosen to die, then all of it would have been for naught. In Hebrews chapter 9, and I want to look at a few different passages this morning as we kind of go through this. There is so much that we could look at today of Jesus being born to die. But in Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 22, and keep in mind, Hebrews is that book, that letter that is making comparisons. And so he's making a point to the Hebrew Christians, predominantly the Hebrew Christians, and of course we have it recorded as well today, of the importance of letting go of things that are no longer in place because Christ has replaced them. Christ has now come and he's taken the place of those sacrifices and those things. And in Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 22, he says, and according to the law, one may almost say all things are cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves were the better sacrifices than these. And what he's talking about, the copies of the things in heaven, God told and showed Moses what the tabernacle was to look like. And when he did so, he did it of a design that reflected what exists in heaven already. As far as our relationship, mankind's relationship to God. And what Jesus came was, what he did when he came was fulfilled every bit of that. And that's the reason, and we're gonna come back up here to where we're reading here in chapter 9. But I want us to glance down at verse 10, because he picks up again, he says, for the law, since it has only a shadow of the good things to come and not the very form of things, can never by the same sacrifices year by year, which they offer continually, make perfect those who draw near. He's making a point down here that the law was just a shadow. It was just a copy of the realness of God and his relationship with mankind. And And so when they would come up to the tabernacle, when they would offer upon an altar, when the priest would enter the holy place and the high priest enter the holy of holies, or the most holy place, with the blood for all the people, it was representative of what Jesus was going to do. It was all looking forward to it. And so when he came to fulfill that. Now back up here, let's start verse 23 again in chapter 9. Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor was it that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with blood not his own. Otherwise he would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now once, at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment, so Christ also, having been offered once, to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time for salvation, without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. So as much as he came once, he's coming back, but he only died once. Even as it is appointed for man to die once, and after this the judgment. But he's saying Christ as well came to die once. He was born to die. He was born to become a sacrifice, and a perfect one. In reflecting on this, I want to read something to you, and I debated about doing this. And it's several pages. If anybody wants to read it, it is rather interesting. I can give you the internet site, probably. I think I've got it somewhere on here. But I began to go back and look at sacrifice for the Hebrew people, but in a little bit different way in this particular occasion, looking at what somebody who is attempting to follow that religion today as a Jew would follow. Because we know that the Jews do not make animal sacrifices today. And I know the reasons that I would give, saying this is the reason they don't offer animal sacrifices today, as a Hebrew nation, as Jewish people. But I wanted to see if they were saying the same thing. And so I looked this up, and korbanot, which basically stands for offering or sacrifice, is the discussion that is made here. And I'm going to read just a little bit of this so you kind of get the perspective. For a long time, I was reluctant to write a page on the subject of korbanot because it is a subject with little practical application today. However, I felt I had to address these issues because it is one of the two subjects I receive the most questions about. Interestingly, the questions I receive on this subject are invariably from non-Jews. Most Jews don't seem to have much interest in ancient practices no longer observed. I will begin by answering the questions I am most commonly asked on these subjects, and then proceed to a more comprehensive discussion of the subject of korbanot. Frequently asked questions. I'm not going to go through all these. But do Jews offer sacrifices today? No. To my knowledge, no Jews today offer any kind of animal sacrifice or offerings, nor have Jews offered sacrifices since the 2nd century. I have occasionally heard rumors that there are Orthodox rabbis in Israel who practice the techniques of ritual sacrifice so that the knowledge will not be lost. I do not know if these stories are reliable, but even if they are, this is not the same thing as offering a sacrifice, because, among other things, the intention is not there. When did Jews stop offering sacrifices and why? For the most part, the practice of sacrifice stopped in the year 70, when the Roman army destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, the place where sacrifices were offered. The practice was briefly resumed during the Jewish War of 132 through 135, but was ended permanently after that war was lost. There were also a few communities that continued sacrifices for a while after that time. We stopped offering sacrifices because we do not have a proper place to offer them. The Torah specifically commands us not to offer sacrifices wherever we feel like it. We are only permitted to offer sacrifices in the place that God has chosen for that purpose. Deuteronomy 12:13 through 14. This is in their Torah. I mean, we have the same, basically, when you go back. You have that Old Testament. Deuteronomy 12:13 through 14. It would be a sin to offer sacrifices in any other place, akin to stealing candles and wine to observe Shabbat. The last appointed place by God for this purpose was the temple in Jerusalem. But the temple has been destroyed, and a mosque has been erected in the place where it stood. Until God provides us with another place, we cannot offer sacrifices. There was at one time an opinion that in the absence of an assigned place, we could offer sacrifices anywhere based on that opinion. Certain communities made their own sacrificial places. However, the majority ultimately ruled against this practice, and all sacrifice ceased. Orthodox Jews believe that when the Messiah comes, a place will be provided for sacrificial purposes. There's a lot more that's really interesting here. You find that very sad? The Messiah came. And yes, he offered sacrifice. We do still have a message to bring to the world, the Jews included. I didn't look this up for the purpose of finding what I found. I was wanting to prove first to myself and then prove to you as well that the Jews could no longer offer sacrifices, because they don't have the place to do it, and God has not commanded them to build another temple there. And so because he hasn't commanded that, they don't have the altar, they don't have the temple. And so these things not existing, they couldn't do so anymore and be pleasing to God in doing so. But isn't it marvelous? I mean, while we see the sadness in this, and that some are still waiting for a time that they would do that again, but many not even interested in the idea of sacrifice at all. But yet it's still so marvelous that God had such a wonderful plan that even as he prophesied through his son Jesus, that you tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. That you see these buildings that are around us, he said, the temple and everything else that they were showing him, there won't be one stone left upon another. Without those there, they weren't going to be able to sacrifice. But Jesus built a new temple. He was born to die. He was born to offer that sacrifice that some are still waiting for. But he's already made it. Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." In Jesus' own words, what he came to do was serve. And when you look at the idea of offering and sacrifice, you look at worship to God, and you look at service, even as the priest would do their service, it became worship to God. And it's the same thing we see in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, when we give our bodies as a living sacrifice, which is our reasonable service of worship. That we worship him today with the sacrifices that we make. And actually in this article, he talks about all the various sacrifices. And it's interesting to read through those things. And it's exactly what you can read in here. That what we can offer today, sin is marginal. Because Jesus is taking care of the sin offering, the guilt offering. He is taking care of those things that take away sin. What we offer today is worship to him. And purely worship. And it's our life. It's what we live. And so we can reflect back on last week's lesson somewhat, that we are born to live. But we're also born to die. Jesus, there were multiple occasions, and one of the probably most memorable occasions is when upper room. They had ate supper already, and then he took a towel and he girded himself around the waist, and he got a wash basin, and he began to go around and wash their feet. And so he was teaching them, this is what you do for each other. The greatest will become the servant. And if Jesus himself says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, then what does that mean for us? In 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8, go ahead and turn over there to 1 John. We haven't turned to too many yet this morning. It says in verse 8 of 1 John chapter 3, the one who practices sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, that he might destroy the works of the devil. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, that he might destroy the works of the devil. He's already made it clear what the works of the devil are. Sin. Jesus came to destroy sin. By doing so, or the means in which he did so, glance over to verse 16. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we also lay down our lives for the brethren. Jesus, in one sacrifice, did so many things. There's a book that's written by John Piper, and I haven't read it yet, but I've read portions of what I can pull up, and I'm going to have to go buy it. I don't know if I can recommend it, but what I've read, has anybody read 50 Reasons that Jesus came to die? Anybody read that? I'm going to have to read it. Like I said, I can't necessarily recommend it, but it's amazing when you begin looking at everything Jesus did. But you could almost start and stop right here in 1 John chapter 3. Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, but he also came to show us that God loves us. I mean, on one hand, you find a tremendous battle that's taking place. On the other hand, it's almost like a mother just holding a baby in her arms. In the same scene. And that's what was happening spiritually when Christ died. Jesus says in John chapter 6, for I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. I want us to turn over to Isaiah chapter 53. A passage that probably most of us have read, heard read, is somewhat familiar to us. But before we start into chapter 53, I want to read the last few verses of chapter 52. Beginning in verse 13. It says, behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred more than any man's, and his form more than the sons of men. Thus he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him, for what had not been told them they will see, and what they had not heard they will understand. Who's believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty, that we should look upon him, nor appearance, that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he bore, and our sorrows he carried, yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging all of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. The Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted. Yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due? His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. I'm going to read on, but remember what Jesus said. He came to do the will of the one who sent him. Verse 10. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief, if he would render himself as a guilt offering. He will see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hands. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors. The plan is always there. We see a manger scene, and it's touching, isn't it? But I wonder how touching it was to Mary and Joseph that night. I mean, from a dad's perspective, Dad, how would you feel if your baby had just been born in a manger? If your wife had to give birth in a place that was not designed for people to even be staying, but animals? How would you feel? Maybe a little bit like a failure. Maybe a little bit like you're not providing very well. Mary, knowing what had been told to her. Of course, Joseph as well, knowing what had been told to him. But Mary, experiencing what she did with the angel and what she experienced with her cousin Elizabeth, who had already at this time given birth to John the Baptist. But having experienced all that, but now here they are in Bethlehem, and the only place for them to stay was out back. I'm not sure how touching a scene it was for them, except for the beholding of that baby. And that changed everything. And that's really the point, isn't it? Him being born changed everything. It could be in a manger, it could have been anywhere. And it would have changed everything. Jesus coming and coming to die, coming to become that sacrifice, changed everything. Because while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. That's what Romans chapter 5 and verse 10 tells us. Jesus, in John chapter 12, we looked at John chapter 12 last week a little bit, where Jesus is explaining to his disciples what's going to happen. He's getting them ready for the cross. And he says, beginning in verse 27, he says, "Now my soul has become troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? but for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify thy name. Jesus, in the midst of preparing them, let them know this is not easy for me. But what am I going to say at this point? Father, save me from this. This is the reason I'm here. Jesus was born to die. We see the birth of Jesus and we're in awe. The praise team wants to go and come up, you guys can. Even as those surely who beheld it firsthand. Mary and Joseph and the shepherds coming. I mean, those who beheld him later on in the temple, even the wise men as they came. What a marvelous, miraculous event that it was. And then eventually his death. But I really don't want to end there this morning. If nothing else, maybe this can be a springboard into next week. But I want us to kind of end on the note of 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 9. I want to end here and offer the invitation as we do. Because he says something here, and we see the things that he's done. And there's so many things that God has done throughout history that wouldn't you have loved to have been there and seen it? I mean, we could name all kinds of things that we would love to have experienced and seen firsthand that God has done. And we get to experience things in our lives as well. But he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. I mean, the most amazing things that we can imagine, the most amazing things that we can look at that God has already done and bringing Jesus to the earth, that we're celebrating a little bit extra this time of year. We can't imagine, and nobody's seen or heard anything like what is going to happen. So that means the story's not over. Sometimes in life, it's really easy to get to a point to reflect on our own birth, to reflect on why we're here, and then even to reflect on our own lives and to think, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I here for a purpose, and am I fulfilling that purpose? Or have I already fulfilled it, or is there more to come? And as much as we can see what Paul was telling the Corinthian Christians, yes, there is more to come. And you wouldn't believe it if you were told. You're here this morning, and you need to respond to the message of Jesus was born to die. He died for you as much as he died for anybody else. If you had been the only one born and the only one who had sinned, it would have taken his death to take that sin away. If you're ready to